Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Cosmic Tape Music Club podcast. I am your host, Jacqueline.
And I'm Augustus.
And together we are the Galaxy Electric. Today we have a special interview as part of our interview series that we're doing right now with people who are alive, as opposed to most of our episodes about people who are dead. Today we have...
Pretty basic qualifier.
Yeah. Out of the UK, we have Robin the Fog, who has a new album out under his moniker Howlround, or his duo project Howlround, and another collaboration with Howlround and DJ Food under the new Obsolescents, which you cannot get as far as I know. Sold out in seconds.
There is a reissue being worked on at the moment. The sleeves have just been designed and the vinyl will be manufactured at some point.
Amazing. When it can be, right?
Can we sign up for that now?
Yeah, please? You've heard it here
we
first.
We missed the first one, unfortunately.
Yeah. I didn't think I missed it, but obviously when I clicked, it was gone.
See what I can do. I'll see if I can put in a good word with with Castles in Space. They hold the keys to the closet, but I'm sure I can pull a few favors.
We appreciate it. Well, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here, and it's good to still be alive.
Yes,
to so many.
Met the mark.
Yeah, that's so. I fulfilled the basic requirement of being on the show.
Amazing. Well, to be honest, what first sparked this was a thread that you have put up, looking for people who are currently working with tape. I believe it was performing with tape was the stipulation.
Yeah, using tape as a performative tool. Because I got a lot of answers that were things like people who have used a tape machine on stage or have recorded their stuff onto tape to kind of grunge it up and give it a nice fuzzy analog warmth, and that's fine. But it was more people that actually had their work shaped by tape, actually sort of the result being used. And someone suggested that the Beastie Boys used a tape loop wrapped around a broom handle, which would fit the remit. Didn't make the final cut of my article, unfortunately, but that works.
That type of work, yeah.
Did the shape of the performance.
Do we have proof that this happened? I would love to.
I need to look into it. It was a comment on the thread. But I would imagine that is quite common because I believe Miles Davis, when he was recording, I think it was On the Corner in the 70s, I think he had a similar thing, or his producer, Tio Macero, had a thing where he had tape loops set up all over the place, and tape loops tend to need restraints, and brooms could actually be just the thing. So, if you look at Wouter van Veldhoven's stuff, he has these kind of spools kind of restraining the tape and just spiraling in midair very beautifully.
Yeah.
And
Marcus Fisher as well, I've seen that technique. Yeah.
And I do not know how they do it because when my machine's
I've tried it. It's hard. Yeah. It's really tough to balance. It's like a physics experiment.
I have never managed to get that level where they just sort of are entirely autonomous and just look very beautiful and elegant. I've never managed to do that. It's always literally me sort of leaning across three machines trying to keep the tension going. But I suppose that in itself makes for quite an interesting performance and quite an interesting sound. But it lacks the glacial beauty of people like Veldhoven or Marcus Fisher or that sort of stuff.
It makes me feel so good to know that it's hard to get the spinning tape reel thing going. I thought I was a complete failure. I was just going to keep my mouth shut, but
failure actually, I think, is a super important part of this. I think a lot of the time you'll get, you won't get what you were expecting, and you'll end up with something that sounds completely different to what you wanted. And I've had this happen to me. I've gone, no, that's not what I want. Oh, actually, that's quite interesting. Yeah.
Happy accidents.
And a lot of the stuff I'm doing at the moment has this kind of really sort of ragged, kind of raw, sort of slurry sound. Because what I've started doing is playing a loop across 2 or 3 machines. And one of them is playing it normally, so the playhead is properly engaged and it's playing it how it should. But the others are just rubbing against the playhead because the tension isn't there. And so you get this kind of scribbly sound, and it's almost an accident, or the discovery, it was almost accidental. But then I started to realize how beautiful that sounded, that kind of there was just this rawness to it. So I think failure actually is often just a sort of weird version of success that you hadn't figured on, truly working with tape means that you have to deal with whatever happens, and you have to have that level of unpredictability, and that failure is or what could be perceived as failure as part of the performance. This is the terrifying thing about me doing shows, is that when I play, that's what happens. Whatever happens, happens. And if it all goes wrong, that's part of the performance. That's it. And it might not feel a very nice or valid or interesting part of the performance, but risk has been incurred. Like, is that the right word? I suppose it is. Risks have been taken. And if it goes wrong or if it goes awry, that is just, and you have to just deal with it and try and sort of rein it in, or well, I say this a lot, but I think the motto I try and tell myself, and I forget it every time and then remember it every time, is that the real discipline comes from letting go. Because we all want to control what we're doing really tightly and go, yes, this is me. I'm making this happen. But sometimes the most interesting stuff comes from setting things up and letting it go and not interfering, and just seeing what happens. And then every now and again, making an adjustment. But, it doesn't make you any less the author of the work, I don't think, because you're allowing it to happen. But it's nice sometimes just to be surprised. Also, I think if you knew what you were going to get, you probably wouldn't bother doing it.
You certainly wouldn't be playing around with tape if that's what you were
exactly.
Already knew what was going to happen.
Yeah. A friend of mine who makes, she's an amazing sound artist called Sound Art Hannah. Well worth checking out. But she does this thing, and I'm paraphrasing her a little bit here, but she makes radios out of toilet roll holders, the cardboard holders, kind of shortwave things. Again, I'm paraphrasing here. This is a conversation we had a few weeks back. And then she was telling me that she had all these people like commenting, oh, well, the proper way to do it is this, or, well, if you're going to try that, surely you should be doing it this way. And you think, well, she's making shortwave radios, or they are making shortwave radios out of toilet roll holders. If you wanted to do it properly, you'd just buy a radio. It's like the whole experiment is just see what happens when you do it. That's what's interesting.
Yeah, that's a really interesting spin on the idea of we have this opportunity to connect with each other and we can all be collaborative. And then there's also a limit to that.
Yeah.
How much input you can take. And is it, at the end of the day, you need to be able to just have your own explorations.
Yeah, I think I really
be happy with whatever happens. Yeah.
And you have to be prepared for a certain amount of it to go wrong. But the amount of times I've had that and I've gone, well, there's nothing there that I can use. And then maybe I've come back to it 3 weeks later and gone, actually some of this is pretty good. There was a thing I did when I did A Creek in Time, which was the soundtrack to Stephen McInerney's film. I had this session where he said, we need one more track for the film. And I was up all night trying to get, the machines were kind of running down a bit. They were actually all going off for a service the next day. So they were all running a bit down and they were a bit creaky and a bit cranky. And everything was going wrong and they were crackling. And I was literally going, no, that's not what I wanted. And I went to bed that night just going, oh, what a disaster. What a waste of time. I failed. I should retire. And the next morning, I don't do small reactions to things. I tend to be like, brilliant or no. But what happened was the next morning, Steve messaged me and he said, where's my final track? You promised me it. And I said, look, man, I'm only sending you this to show you that I wasn't just, sat on my ass last night doing nothing. But it's a disaster. And 10 minutes later, he came back to me with, this is the best thing you've ever sent me. And I thought he was a madman. But when I listened back to it a couple of days later with different ears, I was like, actually, you know what? This is totally the opposite of what I was trying to make. But it's interesting and it's in a different way.
Wow. An interesting spin on the same concept of something you were setting out for a result. You didn't get it, but then someone else heard it without that expectation and was like, yes.
Exactly.
And once you put on their ears, in a sense,
even helps change your perspective a bit. Yeah,
exactly. And the thing is, and the bizarre thing is, I mean, I've been working as Howlround for nearly 10 years now. It'll be 10 years next year. And this is something I have to remind myself over and over again. It happens so often that I go, no, I'm looking for something else. This doesn't sound right. It's going wrong. The machines aren't behaving. But the weird thing is, so often you go back to recordings that you just dismissed and you go, you know what, there is something in here. Maybe it's not perfect, but if I cut this bit away, if I just use this little 2 minutes here, I literally muck around for 2 hours making sounds, putting loops together, creating all kinds of stuff. And it's all done on tape. I should say this, no digital effects, no artificial reverb, no pedals, no synths, no plugins. It's all just tape, sounds manipulated, acoustics or acoustically recorded sounds manipulated on tape with a little bit of tape delay, which is fed back into the, I mean, you guys know what I'm talking about, right?
Sure, we do. And I think our audience would as well, but it's fun to hear. We love to talk about it.
But I do have to explain this to people who go, well, you're putting reverb on it. And I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm creating a situation where it's recording itself and feeding it back anyway.
Yeah.
But I just do that. And I don't think about what I'm doing because I have a terrible tendency to overthink everything. So I don't think about it. I just make. And then maybe 2 days, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks later, I'll go back and I'll go, right, when did it work? And usually you'll be like, oh, there was a nice little 5-minute chunk there. There was a 2-minute chunk there. There was 30 seconds there that was good. Or maybe, that could be a loop on its own. There's a nice little sample there that I could use. And often as well, like the new album, Worm Food Delivery, both of those tracks are just one take because I just started. And when I released The Debatable Lands, right, I'm really worried that when I come around to doing the career retrospective, I'll be like, oh, wait, I've given this track about 4 different titles and put it on 3 different releases. And, because everything is demo 1, 180221 until it's given a name. Anyway.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, right. I mean, yes. But all of those tracks were done in one take. Everything I try and do now in one take. So it's not even a question of remixing a lot of the time or mixing. A lot of it is just literally, there was 5 minutes there that just coalesced into a really nice piece. Yeah. So, I'm getting lazier maybe. I don't know.
Well, I'm curious. You've talked about a lot of the limitations that you've put on yourself is in Howlround. We'll talk about, I guess, specifically. And I'm curious how you came to those limitations.
Simply that just gradually over time, I think, because initially when I only had 1 or 2 machines, a lot of the time what I would be doing is I'd have a single loop and I would just record randomly onto that and then dub that in for like a couple of minutes. So the first album, a lot of the time is 6 or 7 tracks of the same loop. So because they're the same loop at the same speed, they all kind of roughly fit, but also they don't always sometimes as well. So you get the kind of elements, kind of like tectonic plates kind of shifting in and out of sync with each other. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that was made. So a lot of that was mixed, but quite quickly I would just go, right, I've got 6 tracks, bang, 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 bang. Yeah, sounds good. I'll mix that to the side slightly, or I'll shift that slightly. Oh, there it is. It's fine. But even then, I tended to find that the first thing I did was the thing I went with. Literally, I would just, and I'd be like, yeah, actually, that sounds pretty good. Or it just wouldn't at all. But increasingly, the plan was always to not use any digital effects, because my theory was that now, with synths, with samplers, with pedals, you can do this on your phone. You can do it on GarageBand and brilliantly as well. And I'm very happy about that. I think there's a lot of fantastic electronic music being made. I think, there's a lot of very beautiful stuff out there at the moment. But I think it's quite interesting to do something where you go, right, well, here's what happens if you don't have all that equipment at your disposal, I made a piece of music once with my friend's kids. A piece of experimental music.
Sure.
We just had a phone and an iPad. I was staying at their house, and we just literally bounced recordings back between the two of them of making kind of weird voice noises. And it's weird how quickly it just started to totally come apart. Yeah, and I'm currently, do you know Alvin Lucier's I'm Sitting in a Room?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the best example. Literally recording and playing back your voice over and over again until it becomes this amazing sort of, that's all it takes to do that. Mm-hmm. So I think limitation, simply it really makes you push what you've got. What was his name? Peter Sellers, that was it. The theatre director. Mm-hmm. I listened to an interview with him as part of my job as an archive sound engineer, which is my sort of current day job, was archiving a large art organization's tape collection. And there was an interview with him. Oh, it's fantastic. I love it. But there was an interview with him as part of their collection. And he said that his policy was to take either an actor or a tape recorder, as 2 examples that he gave. And what he did was he pushed them as hard as he could until they got to a stage where they could no longer bear it, or, they reached a point they couldn't go any further. And if I remember his exact words, it was something like, and then suddenly they reveal something of their essence in the heat and crunch of it all. And I was like, yeah, exactly.
Oh, and we heard the short interview you did with Halim Al-Dab as well. It's in Tover. Amazing.
I would have loved to have met him.
Yeah.
But obviously, my friend on the West Coast, I keep saying, hey, let's go to Akron, Ohio. And I think her exact words were, yeah, you can go. I'm never, why the hell would I want to go to Akron, Ohio? But, and I think there's quite a big sort of music scene there as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely like a tour stop in the Midwest.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd go, but my friend doesn't share our taste.
As Americans, we understand what your friend is saying.
She's more of a Garth Brooks kind of gal.
Okay.
I respect that. She did take me to a country gig once. I think it was Kenny Chesney.
Wow.
A very interesting evening.
Okay, you have had a real American experience then.
Actually,
I've never been to a Kenny Chesney concert.
Well, let me tell you, it was a fun night. It was a real for a British guy. It was my second time in the US. It was a real experience.
Oh my goodness!
See a bunch of country-loving folk cutting loose.
Yeah,
we haven't even.
A lot of big hats.
I personally have not had that.
We have not dared to go there ourselves. So that's you have one up on us there.
Call me an anthropologist. Anyway, the most American thing I ever did, and it was a total coincidence, but me and Caitlin drove over the Golden Gate Bridge listening to David Hasselhoff sing Like a Rhinestone Cowboy. And that is the single most American thing ever, I think. But,
that is beautiful.
His version of it isn't nearly as awful as it should be. It's actually...
I've heard that.
The guy can sing.
It's funny.
I mean, he's a hero in Germany, right?
Yeah, he's very big in Europe.
Massive.
We don't spend a lot of time talking about him here in America as well.
No.
But the idea that other people, other places think he's cool is what we generally think.
The man's a don
cool
over here. Calling Americans about their musical history, though.
It's funny. Well, we often, because of our interest in the type of music that we make, and tape tends to bring us right to the doorstep of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And so we tend to have a lot more conversations with people in the UK than we do in America. But now they're coming out of the woodwork. We're finding them. We've got this group called the Cosmic Tape Music Club, and now everyone's getting connected all over the world, and it's really fun. But it does seem to be something that, most of the people we cover, most of the topics, most of the resources, there's a lot of history, in the UK that, or at least that is maybe broke more of a cultural barrier. Like, obviously we have the Columbia, Princeton Electronic Music Center here, things happened in America around electronic music, but there's something about the myth, and the fun of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop that I think, brought tape music to the fore and has staying power at this point. Yeah. At least in our little bubble.
Myth is absolutely the right word. I think fun, probably not. Because I think
the fun of the myth maybe is what I meant.
I think my impression, and again, I should say all of this is conjecture on my part from things I've seen, from things I've watched, from things I've read, and from people I've talked to. I've been lucky enough to meet a few of the old hands of the Radiophonic Workshop over the years. I've been very lucky to meet people like Dick Mills and Brian Hodgson, both of whom are legends as far as I'm concerned.
Have you ever come across a recording from Unit Delta Plus?
I've got quite a few. I've got sort of a few recordings by things like Zinovyev's EMS and the White Noise records, and and there's also a couple of amazing live.
Rest in peace.
Yes, he's just passed away. Yeah, I met him actually very briefly as well. We did a Howlround performance at Coventry Cathedral for Delia Derbyshire's 80th birthday. That was 4 years ago. And he was also on the bill, and he sat in this chair with a laptop in front of him. Bear in mind, we did the whole tape loop setup.
Of course, he doesn't care about that at all.
he had a laptop, and he said, "Oh, I haven't tape loops. I haven't seen those for a while." And I was like, "Yeah, all right, Peter." And then he sat there and he said that he'd composed this new piece. This is true. He said he'd composed this new piece, and to make the piece, he'd had long conversations with Delia Derbyshire of the Radiophonic Workshop, and Ludwig van Beethoven. I swear I'm not misremembering this. And he said he had this thing where he had to try and explain to Beethoven what a loudspeaker was, and he had to explain it was like a trumpet in the ceiling or something. And everyone's, you got 500 people sat in this cathedral, and you could hear everyone going, "What is he talking about?" What I wanted to ask him was, I wanted to say, Peter, which was the bigger problem, him being profoundly deaf or profoundly dead? It's like, which one was the biggest setback for you?
Oh my goodness. He is such a character. He was such a character. It's so entertaining.
I'm making this up, but I swear that's what he said.
I 100% believe you. From the time we spent researching him and the kinds of reactions we got from people about the things he said, we were like,
actually,
he's just making stuff up all the time.
Now that I think about it,
fascinating.
His episode was the worst, was like the biggest in terms of like negative feedback that we got from people fact checking us about the stuff.
That's what he says about himself.
Half the shit he was saying must have been bullshit, because
none of it's true.
We were just like,
he's such a character. Talk about myth,
Jacqueline got into like almost like a fight with somebody about like quoting, like he's like, I know that he said this and that's all I'm saying, like to that level.
Sure. You've got to be able to read the absurdity for yourself.
I think he believes it.
Right.
I also think memory is, this is a bit of a fascination of mine. I think memory is complete nonsense. I think we all claim to remember things clear as day, but I think it's bollocks, frankly. I think we only think we remember. We've all had that sort of moment where you go, oh wow, for years I thought I could have sworn blind that it was this way around, or it was like this, and now I realize it wasn't. Apparently there was some experiment in some university done in the early 20th century. Again, don't fact check me. I read this a few years ago. They did this thing where they were having this big debate, and these two students got into a really heated row, and one of them pulled a gun and shot the other. And the police got involved, and they made everyone take statements in the entire class. But what the class didn't know was that the whole thing had been scripted. And they found out that a horrifying % of the students who were eyewitnesses and were in the classroom and saw it all happen in front of them got it completely wrong, their memory of the event. So I'm always I try and be a little patient with people when they say, yeah, it definitely happened like this. I definitely remember it. There's so many like gigs I've been to or performances I've done where I was like, that was transcendental. But I guarantee you, if I listen back to a recording of it, it would be like an early band I was in once got a review. We had a track on a compilation, and it said, to be honest, you really need to see these guys live. And I was like, no, that's shorthand for this doesn't sound as good as it did when I was like literally off my box at 4 a.m. in some warehouse somewhere. It doesn't sound as good as I remembered it when I was mashed. So I think memory is, which brings us back to tape.
I was going to say, you did it. You brought us right back.
You want to talk about a Radiophonic workshop? Sorry.
We can talk about whatever. It's just that these are things that are all threads of everything we're talking about, and that
I would love to hear more. I would love to hear the Unit Delta Plus stuff. Yeah. But to be honest, I would say with a lot of these things, if you've heard the Electrosonic album and the ESL, well, I mean, it's available commercially as the Tomorrow People soundtrack, but right. I think they have. I think it's just called ESL 104, but it's also the Tomorrow People soundtrack. Blah blah blah. If you've got those, I mean, that's the real, and you've got some of Vorhaus's other work and Delia's other work. That's the. I think really we've probably heard the best of their work. The Delia Derbyshire tape archive, they did this whole thing 10 years ago where they archived it and it's now available. And a lot of people are saying, where is it? Where's the contents of the archive? And I think the fact is I think all the amazing stuff and it is amazing, but I think we've probably heard all the really exciting stuff. And I think if we hadn't, if you listen to Dance from Noah, mm-hmm. I mean, it's perfect. It's magnificent. I mean, how could you top that? Or Bluebells and Golden Sands. It's a perfect.
I think for me, there's this element of like the sort of wanting to get as close to being in the room with them as I can.
Mm.
So like those Unit Delta Plus sessions, like there's something really, really mysterious about that I want to just feel a little closer to it.
It sounds like, from depictions in films, and I can't talk about this, but stories I've heard and interviews I've read, and that particular Delia Derbyshire film that came out, I think getting close to it might have been unwise. I think you might have been sort of like enwrapped in some kind of whirlwind of drug use and orgies, and allegedly.
Like maybe we can't handle the truth.
Yeah, that's not good.
I actually think I found the Delia movie. I loved it. I was very happy it got made. But I think making her out to be I don't think in any way she was a happy person, really. I think
that's the impression we get.
The sad, tragic fact is that Delia pretty much went to her grave convinced that nobody remembered her and that nobody cared about her work. And now she's lauded as this pioneer, and rightly so.
Good point that we are living in this era where it's like she's with us still.
Yeah, and
she's getting to enjoy it too, but she's not.
No, not at all. And this is the other thing. I mean, there's been things I've heard recently where people have been taking her makeup tapes, kind of snatches of things she was working on or ideas or whatever, and they've been kind of combining them.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been sort of combining them maybe with samples of her voice, or they've been using bits of text. And I'm like, I got called curmudgeonly for this. People don't agree with me about this. I got called very
strong feelings around this for sure.
But as I said at the time, you don't take some artist's sketchbook and just start daubing new colours over the top of it. You don't do that. I mean, if we could hear the original work, even if it is in fragments, I would rather hear the fragments of what she made herself than it's the same with people doing remixes. I
hate like techno remixes of the Doors.
No.
It's like that.
The trouble is, every now and again, one will come along that's so brilliant that you'll go, all right, fair enough. But the vast majority of it, like when people were remixing Pierre Henry or there's the Telex remix album that came out, and you're like, guys, you can't top this stuff. And by trying to like add new stuff to it, you're just, I'm sorry, I'm being a bit bitchy now.
We love it.
I think it is unwise to start adding new bits to, even if it's unfinished, to composers' work. I think, it's.
Do you think this comes from maybe your stance as an archivist too, or your work as an archivist?
That's a very good point. No, I don't think.
Great.
Because I think the role of an archive is to make this work available, and I'm super happy that all these records are coming out and I get to hear them. Because if I'm honest, when I was a student, I didn't really know who the Radiophonic Workshop. It was sort of something that was on the credits of Doctor Who, but I hadn't really looked into it because at the time I was still making or trying to make really bad student drum and bass tracks, and sort of, and I was like, oh, can I sample that and put a breakbeat underneath it? And it was awful. No one's ever going to hear that stuff. But then I got into the Radiophonic Workshop initially because people that I liked, like Luke Vibert and Wagenkreist, and because they sampled it.
Yeah.
Luke Vibert sampled John Baker on a Wagenkreist track, and then I saw a documentary on it, and I was like, oh, that's a Wagenkreist sample, and
I'm a big fan of Wagenkreist.
Oh yeah, no, I mean the guy's a legend. Don't get me wrong, but that's how I got in. I got into everything. I got into through dance music, through techno, through jungle, through drum and bass.
Me too. Yeah.
Picking the samples and going, okay, so that's where that comes from. And then gradually you find that the original work is actually a lot more interesting than what subsequent generations have done with it. And this is still something I have now. I find that I would rather hear the original version, even if it's a bit rough around the edges, even if it's a bit fragmented. I'd rather hear what it is than hear it sort of taken and remixed and primped and, obviously it's all subjective. Sometimes someone will do just the right thing, but I find so often you don't need to add layers of gilding to things. They're kind of interesting as they are. And I think I was going to say, just to go back to another point, I think the really interesting thing about the Radiophonic Workshop, and forgive me if you've heard this many times before, but I think it's worth pointing out, is that in, Columbia, Princeton, in the San Francisco Tape Music Center, in places in Germany, in Paris, I'm not going to pronounce the thing in Paris because my French is awful, but what they were research institutes. They were funded, they were given the latest equipment, the most sort of advanced equipment they had, and it was research, and it was trying to find new ways of composing and new ways of sculpting sounds and new ways of listening as well. Mm-hmm. Very important, very loyal, very admirable that they did that those facilities were made available. But in Britain, it was like it wasn't a jolly. It was literally, we've got to make the theme tune for this new radio program or a radio jingle, or we've got to make, and we've got 2 weeks. We've got a couple of tape machines, a couple of oscillators, some whistles and some bells. And again, the limitation, like they didn't actually have that much equipment, and it was very basic stuff. You've got more technology in your phone than they had in the entire studio. So it was literally, right, how can we make the example I always give is Brian Hodgson's TARDIS sound effect. The brief was, we want the sound of time and space itself being ripped apart, and that was achieved with a front door key scraped on the wires of a piano, because and again, it was like, on the continent, maybe you'd sort of run it through some huge sort of device and just have all these crazy things happen. But it was just like, right, we need this by next week. We haven't got really much of a budget. We haven't got much equipment. How can we push it to make it sound? And so there's a twofold thing. On the one hand, it's the limitation, the pushing it as hard as you can to try and get interesting things out of the most basic objects. And another thing is that, and again, you probably get this thousands of times, is that then ended up going out on Saturday evenings on the main TV channel, so into people's living rooms around tea time. You've got the sound, I am the biggest fan in the world of, all the work that people like Pierre Henry, Pierre Schaeffer were doing in Paris and in France and Stockhausen as well in Germany and and all those. I mean, it's incredible, and it's but it was a very academic exercise. Yes. And although it's still for me counts as the future and still counts as far out adventurous listening, it's somewhere I go to now because I'm mature and sophisticated, and I've allegedly, but that was literally going out to kids, to families, Saturday tea time, eating your dinner, hearing the sounds of the future. And if you look at the sort of British electronic music over the last 40 years, you can totally see how many musicians were kids in the 70s, in the late 60s and 70s, listening to all these strange sounds. Mm-hmm. I think that was the one thing that was the one sort of side effect of that, is that this stuff was coming out into the real world, whether people liked it or not.
I love that idea. Yeah. I love the idea of people being like, just, blindsided or, like
there's not like they can just go on YouTube.
Almost like we were talking about.
You had, that was all you could listen
digesting to. It. It's like, we're just going to drop this extremely strange, completely drugged out stuff on you right now while you're having tea.
In your PE class as well, in your school. Yeah. There's this amazing BBC LP called Movement, Mime and Music. Mm-hmm. And on the one side, it's, got samples of different noises, marching and things like that. But on the other side, it's got radiophonic pieces. So it's got Delia, it's got John Baker's Structures, which if I had to pick one truly incredible piece of radiophonic music, it just might be Structures, because to me it still sounds like outer space, it still sounds like a brave new world, it still sounds like the unknown, like the uncanny. Mm-hmm. And this is like being played in a school gymnasium and people pretending to be trees or pretending to be frogs or pretending to be going into space. It's like, so and the thing is, I can't really talk knowledgeably about this because this was old when I was growing up. Mm-hmm. There wasn't any of this left. But one of the things I've seen in my archive job is a box set called Creating Music in Class. And it's a 1976 teacher's package. And it's got 5 little spools of reel-to-reel tape on it and a whole bunch of graphic scores. and it's effectively teaching 10 to 13-year-old children in the 1970s how to make experimental music or how to be more adventurous in there. And you're like, what? The bad thing is that the tapes mostly are just listening exercises, but there are a couple of realizations of the scores on the tapes, 90-second pieces. And you're like, and it sounds like what the grown-ups were doing, and you're like, holy crap. But when I was growing up, I swear we never had anything like that. So
we certainly didn't. We're just super nostalgic for what was right before us.
And I don't think anybody did in this country. I don't even think they got what you're talking about.
We mine from the UK a lot.
But the thing is, again, they say that, I heard somebody say once that you're obsessed with what you just missed, the generation you just missed. I think that's because when I was growing up, the late 70s was still lingering on. So there was still every sort of Saturday afternoon kids programs or whatever, they'd always be accompanied by cautionary tales, public information films, public service announcements of kids with really unfashionable bowl haircuts and flares, sort of, oh, my Frisbee's gone into the substation. Just wait here. I'll be back in a couple of uneventful minutes. And then the next thing you see, drain pipe trousers on fire. But so, and I totally, I still can't see a pylon without hearing a kind of modular synthesizer sort of ominously noodling in the background. It's written into your DNA almost.
Yeah.
But if I'm honest, electronic music wasn't a big part of my childhood, but I realize now that sound was. I in a really childish way, I started to listen to sounds, not in a sort of, wow, what a bright little boy. Not at all. I just sort of, looking back at things I watched when I was a kid, nothing interesting really. I noticed that the sound of it, the rhythm of words of people were saying, and there was something on fighter planes that I watched over and over again as a kid, and I realized when I watched it back that the sound of the engines and the particular rhythm of the and I remembered it verbatim, which totally contradicts what I was saying earlier about memory. But
but you remember that you said that. I just
think in my mind, sure he did,
But you're pointing to something that we see a lot and that we've felt in our lives too, is that there's that thread of listening or paying attention or being interested in sound and rhythm that's not happening from an instrument.
Yes.
Happening in the world. That you're going, wait, those things in the distance that are clinking together, they sound like a song to me.
Yeah. It was, and again, when you're a kid, your sort of mind is kind of so open to things without even realizing you're doing it, that you're soaking it all up without even noticing. I remember when I was a small child, I could listen to I could memorize something off the TV because we didn't have a video recorder. I could memorize almost verbatim just after one go. Now I can't do that, but I would sort of. Again, it's so weird, the electronic music thing, because when it happened, I liked it, but it didn't occur to me that this was a thing.
It was baked in somewhere into your
it was
perception or something.
Yeah, and electronic music was this sort of I think that's it. It was a thing that it didn't occur to me that I liked it because there were so many other things that I liked as well. And I think when you're a kid, you just accept everything, and it's only later on that you go, like kids TV, some of the programs you liked they were just on. The TV was just on. You weren't. It didn't really matter if it wasn't any good. I mean, some of the stuff I've watched as an adult, and I'm like, holy, this is terrible. This is the worst. But when you're a kid, I think your critical faculties aren't there. So you just watch, you just listen, you just take in, and it doesn't occur to you whether it's good or not, unless it's very specifically bad or very specific. You just take it all in, and it's only later that you think about how you took it in, and you go, oh, actually, that sound must have really spoken to me somehow. There's a kids' TV show called Picture Box. You'll find the intro on YouTube.
Oh yes, I've seen this.
Yeah, Larry Bachet's music, and I still remember thinking how strange and haunting it was when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't go, I must now. It wasn't like a kind of, I wonder if he'll make electronic music one day. It was just...
Yes. I've posted that before because I don't have any connection to it. I just enjoy it. And it always gets that, like, please take this off. It's so triggering for me.
Well, if you watch the title sequence as well, you've got this kind of jeweled casket.
Yes.
Revolving with the spotlight on it.
Yeah, it just looks like cool colors to me, but I didn't know what's there, what's behind it. What's the message really?
But I think the strangeness of it, is, of the whole thing, the music and the image.
But yeah, there's like a sound in the beginning that people say just like makes them feel strange and they don't like.
Yeah.
From their childhood. Yeah.
I think it's only later on that you realize that it was having an effect on you. It was, I didn't, my dad, when I was a baby, played me Oxygen by Jean-Michel Jarre when I wouldn't go to sleep, apparently. And I always loved that album. And I think in some way that, the memory of that, I think definitely sowed a seed. But again, it wasn't like, I'm going to do music now. That didn't happen for like till I was like 11 or 12 when I suddenly went, music's amazing. It was.
Have you seen him play live, Jean-Michel?
No, I met him once. I got a selfie with him. Wow. And I sent the selfie. I don't do selfies. I've done 2 selfies in my life. One was with Jean-Michel Jarre. One was with Mike Nelson from Mystery Science Theatre. I sent it to my dad and I was like, it's me and Jean-Michel Jarre. And he said, wow, we used to play you his album when you wouldn't obey. And I was like, I know, Dad, that's why I'm sending it to you. But the thing is, I remember loving that album, but not being a thing, I didn't.
You weren't going, this is electronic music and I'm going to make this now. You're just like, sounds.
Right. But there's a weird thing that I used to have when I was a kid. There were certain sounds on the album, certain noises that were like, it sounds really silly explaining it. And I think the sleeve art might have something to do with it. But there's a certain sound in one of the pieces that's the sound of the nose. And there's a certain other sound, which is the eye.
This sounds like something that child.
That sound, the nose sound is orange.
Mm-hmm. Do you have that? Did that carry on for you?
No, not at all. I do have a friend who used to have. She has no sense of smell following a car accident when she was a teenager, but she could smell music. But I have noticed this thing where I like if I'm really concentrating on a piece of music, if I'm making something and I'm listening back to it, I notice I do this thing where my hands sort of go into these kind of claws like this. It's like I'm trying to hold it. It's like I'm trying to grasp it. Or I can't listen to a certain piece of music without wiggling my fingers. And it's sort of like, I don't know, it's sort of, I think I realized that music and sound has a shape. It has
mass. Yeah.
It has mass, yeah. And I could never describe it or draw it but it was like a wiggling thing that just sort of,
that reminds me of like graphic scores or something.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you start to, and people say, they say that sounds are round or we have square waves, don't we? And we have, people talk about sounds being globular or sort of or wet.
Sure.
It's, so I would love to be able to say that I was just like, obsessed with sound from an early age. But I think in some obscure way, I always knew I wanted to like do arty stuff. Like I liked drawing and I liked painting and I liked, so I think I always wanted to, and I liked telling stories. I was good at telling stories. Well, as good as a 8-year-old boy can be at telling stories. I think they were probably went nowhere and were very self-aggrandizing, but it all, I think it comes to this thing where you soak it all up without thinking about it. And then later on you go, that must have had an effect. That, that weird bit of electronic music must have had an effect. That strange old kids program must have had an effect.
Well, if you apply that same rule that you were describing about Walt Disney, which I've actually heard a quote from John Cage as well describe as something similar. If we're living our lives, that's the act of life, right? And we're all trying to analyze our lives at the same time. But this principle of like doing it and then analyze, I don't know, maybe we get to analyze it once we're gone. I don't know. But it seems counterproductive, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Alan Watts said this as well. I think I've recently got into him. I say I've watched a few YouTube videos and read one of his audiobooks. I don't know if that's getting into it, but he talks about this. He said the surest way to be unhappy is to ask yourself if you're happy. The surest way to stop enjoying something is to ask yourself if you're enjoying it, and it's so true. What actually got into music was 11 years old, watching a band called Alternate on Top of the Pops. They did break America, sort of. I don't know if they
Alternate.
Oh, it's Altern-8.
I was going to say there's an 8 in there. Yeah. I know there is.
Alternate. So all their track titles, or a lot of them, had like that joke where it was like hallucinate, hypnotic state, activate.
Wow, they really ran with that.
Must have been something like 8, that sort of thing. But they were on Top of the Pops, and they were performing a song called Activate. And the song had like robot laser noises in it. And I would have been 11. And I just went, it's got robot laser noises in it. And suddenly I'm interested. It's like, I like this now. And
like the disco lasers, like boom, 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 like that kind of thing, or
yeah, not too, but it had this like weird synth, like and I was just like, oh yeah, I like this, and then the landslide into just complete obsession weirdly hasn't ever stopped, and I think it's got worse. I think I'm actually now, I might have gone too far because I've always been obsessed with it. But the bizarre thing is that now I'm getting more and more obsessed. And, it's like I want to hear more sound, not less.
That's fascinating.
It's and the more I do Howlround, for example, the more frustrating it gets, the more difficult it gets, but the more exciting it gets and the more it seems to open up. So,
does your setup drive that, or do you, like, in terms of, are you thinking about the gear first, or like where does that fit into your process chain?
I'm not sure. Again, limitations. Recently I had this thing where I was just using one machine and a microphone.
Oh, cool.
And I'd watched this Heimbach video where he did this thing where he blocked off the erase head on the tape recorder, put a loop through it, and I was like, oh yeah, you can do that. And I'd never really experimented with it before. But I only really had one machine with me and this microphone. And I was basically trying to conduct this kind of seance where I was trying to convince my housemate the flat was haunted. It didn't work. But I did get some amazing results, sounds as a result. And I realized what you could do, just with that, and then I don't know. I really am not sure. But what I try and do is approach it every time, because you always fall back into the old habits, right?
Right. I guess, yeah. Am I saying, are you deliberate about it, or do you let just like whatever's around, now I'm going to play with this? Or is it like a meticulous setup process beforehand?
Nothing I do is ever meticulous. I'm a mess, basically. So
it kind of comes with the territory, I think.
I had a thing where I recorded something at a very slow speed and then accidentally played it back at the wrong speed, like much, much faster. And instead of it sounding awful, I was like, wow, it suddenly sounded really fractured and really like insane. Yep. And I was just like, right, that is, so it's a weird thing. You just, I don't know, I think also, like, I started off using field recordings. So the first album was an entire building. The second album was a ruined building. The third album, I think, was a gate. The fourth album was a hinge. And then the two new albums, or well, certainly the one before that, actually, I'm losing count, was the sounds of the machines themselves, like closed inputs.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Right. So the weird thing is that the further along I go, the more into the machines I go, and the more
I see that pattern.
And then I did a thing the other day where I was literally just feeding two machines against each other, and I was giving them nothing. It was silent, but they started going whoop, 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 and they just started, and I would occasionally adjust the EQ just a little bit, but they'd start just making all these crazy sounds all on their own. And then I did a thing for my friend's birthday where I recorded myself singing Happy Birthday as long and as slow as I could into the microphone, and then I played it back at the wrong speed, and it sounded like a wax cylinder recording. and the tune was completely obliterated. I sent it to her on her birthday. I got a message back 5 minutes later saying, "I'm guessing this is you, Fog. You freaked David out." That's her boyfriend, who makes a lot of weird noises himself, actually. So he should be used to this. I think for some reason my name didn't come up on the chat or whatever, but she's still speaking to me just about. But it's just, I don't know. It's. I mean, there are, and for all I'm saying, there are days when nothing really gets done, and like you make something that's not quite as good as the thing you made yesterday, or it's the same idea. But so often, I don't know, just I can't explain it. Just stuff happens, and then you listen back.
Totally acceptable answer.
Get this right. You go, how did that? What was that? When? How did we do that? Where did that come from? And I have a track on an album called A Creek Retimed, which is actually Steve's film. It's an album of responses to that film. So the film came out, the album came out. Did very nicely, won a few awards, which was great.
Oh.
Not like not a BAFTA or an Oscar, but nice.
There's other awards.
The European Classical Circuit, and it was very well received. But he made an album, or he commissioned an album of artist responses to it, and 2 of the tracks were unissued Howlround tracks from the sessions. But one of those tracks was literally I spooled up a reel of tape, and I was like, right, I need a new empty reel to record onto. I don't think there's anything important on this, but I'll play it just to be sure. And I started playing it, and I was like, what is that? And there was this kind of this kind of rhythm, and it had other things coming in and out of it, and there was like little bits of voices in there, and there were these kind of and I was like, right, I know this is something I've made. I know it. I recognize something. Somehow I recognize it, but I could not tell you, how am I doing that? That's a rhythm, and rhythms are quite hard to do as tape loops because they tend to be quite, stretchy in a nice way, but they tend to sort of, the rhythm tends to be a bit all over the place. But this was almost like a metronome, and I was like, I have no idea how I've done this. But there was 9 minutes of it, and it noodled a bit. I was obviously trying something out. I was obviously having a go at something. And I have no recollection. And the finished piece is literally, I went, right, there's a minute there that it worked, there's 4 minutes, there's 2 minutes there. And I just literally edited it down to that. And that's the piece. And I have no recollection of making it, and I have no idea how I made it. Absolutely no idea. All I know is that it was made at some point.
That's awesome.
It's the best thing in the world. And I'm just going to put some lights on because I've realized I'm sat here in the dark. And also, I think as well, the fun of it, the joy of it is seeing where it goes. I think, again, I think I'm repeating myself, but if you knew what you were going to get when you started, somebody once said to me, electronic music, you just press a button and the computer does it all for you. And I said, but, well, where would be the fun in that? Where's the joy in that? If I was making 10 grand every time I press that button, it would, that would be brilliant. But I'm not. Where would be the fun in just letting a computer do all the work? It's much more fun to, roll up your sleeves and see where you end up.
Well, I think you're speaking to that thing that we study a lot in what we're doing, is that the pioneers of early electronic music that we've read about were really excited about computers and really excited about automation and really excited about getting it kind of out of their hands.
Yeah.
Some people, not everyone.
Not everybody.
But we, as you were saying, are nostalgic for something we just missed. And we've always had this thing that makes things too easy. Yeah. And so we want to get back to using our hands. And that's a lot of what we talk about with our audience and our fans and other people who are kind of into this kind of thing, is that we stare at screens all day. We're tired of computers. We know they make life easier, but it's just, where's the fun in it?
Exactly. And the bizarre thing is that now you get software where the errors are put back in. I mean, that's crazy. You can get filters for your Instagram that make it look like it was taken in the 70s. You can add blurred colors, and you can add lens, not on Instagram, maybe, but you can add lens flare. You can add film grain. All the things that, like, for the people we admire would have been like, damn it, I wish there was a way we could get rid of film grain, or I wish there was a way we could make this sound a bit less warbly and wobbly. It's a lot of people are using tape. I've just written this thing for The Wire about tape.
Yes, of course. Yes, we want to hear about this.
Well, I can't reveal anything.
No. Top secret.
But one of the points I really wanted to make clear was that tape now is often used as a kind of shorthand for, warble and fuzz and decay and degradation and all that kind of stuff. And not just because of William Basinski, who, the Disintegration Loops is just a magnificent piece of work. It's a towering achievement. But a lot of people do use tape, to grunge things up, to get this idea of degradation, of fuzz, of decay. But we forget that it's actually an amazing sort of sculptural tool as well. Mm-hmm. And what I try and do with Howlround now, because Howlround's early material, is based a lot on that. It's based on this idea of tape as a fragile medium. And I still think that's beautiful. But what I try and do, and there's still elements of that in Howlround now, but I do try and also have it as the tape being, as the tape sort of being the creative force of the track as well. Like, not just degradation and decay, but actually, kind of like a lot of the new stuff is really quite blistering. There's no degradation in it. It's just raw kind of feedback. But also just because you can edit tape in such an amazing way, if you've got an editing block and a razor blade, a sharp razor blade and some splicing tape, you can literally do some incredible things. John Baker would measure out the notes. He would get all the pitch correct, would measure out the notes, and he could work out how to cut a note slightly short so that it would anticipate the beat and it would give it a swing.
Yes, we love his work.
Do that with millimeters of tape. But, so it's... And
which again, I think there was also a thought of like, wow, I wish this was easier. But for us, we're like, but it wouldn't be what it was.
It wouldn't.
That is the thing I'm interested in.
It was, once you get quantizing, and there's nothing wrong with any of these things, but once you get that, the swing that he was looking for isn't there. Like computers, I think, they try and put everything onto a grid, but there is something to be said for just seeing where it goes. And often, it's like when you sort of suddenly decide you're going to color outside the lines, or you're going to just sort of, there's
going to be an outside judgment about that, or even an internal judgment that's come from the outside, that there is something wrong with this. Like we were talking about before, fighting that impulse to go back into the DAW and put things back into the structured place. Yeah.
When I used to doodle when I was a kid, I used to get so frustrated because I'd get it wrong. I'd make a line wrong, or I'd and I'd be like, oh, it's ruined now. I've ruined the whole thing. It was going so well. But the bizarre thing is that as I've got older, because I still doodle a bit, I've just left them in. I've just left the mistakes in. And in event, and I've sort of like almost encouraged mistakes. I've just sort of gone really fast and just almost tried to get it wrong deliberately when I'm drawing. And the weird thing is, although it's not perfect, it's certainly got somehow more character than if I'd done it completely right and I'd got it absolutely pristine. It's got that sort of,
that's a beautiful sentiment. And I think that is a good wrapping point for this conversation in its official capacity.
I have talked for a long time, but it's been such a pleasure though.
No, not at all. We could go all night. This is what we love talking about. If you find someone who actually wants to talk to us about it, we will not let you leave this square on our screen.
Yeah, I feel like this needs to be like a 7-day, 7-part series where we just talk every day for a while. I feel like that could really get it out.
You don't know what's going to come out of it, right?
Oh, right. Okay.
A different view.
But the trouble is, this is why I haven't got into synths actually, because it's infinite. Mm-hmm. My brain doesn't work. Like, there's so much I could potentially do with a synth, and it could just go on and on for days and days and days, and it would be great. It'd be so much fun. But it kind of freaks me out. I'm just like, no.
Yeah, if you're not already in that, I would say stay away for sure.
It's like too many possibilities. I'm like, that thing where you've got infinite possibilities and you just go,
none. I'll do nothing.
Nothing.
I would say that it's the biggest exercise for self-control in my life.
Interesting.
Yeah. Keeping that restrained, like not just wanting after any and every module. First of all, I've stuck to a pretty esoteric format that helps. Not that many modules available, so it's
right. That was one of your things. You're like, if I get into Buchla, then there's only so many modules. So
right.
Yeah.
Like I could build them all and still not have that big of a system, whereas like the Eurorack stuff is just,
it's just,
insanity.
Yeah.
It's like
I said, plugins in the early 2000s or late 90s.
It got really silly, didn't it? Yeah.
I'm nostalgic for that era though, of music production. So that's something I've been sort of like revisiting. Oh, no. I'm not going to go into it, but I've just been like, re-experiencing like the OS 9 like plugins and stuff. And I feel like there's that was an interesting era in music software, because I felt like a lot of the, it was very new in terms of like DSP and stuff. And so I just feel like a lot of brain power was going into it.
Yeah.
At that time specifically. And a lot of those people moved on to other things or pulled out or, whatever, like their company went belly up. And so like, there's these like applications that you can get for OS 9, and a lot of it's like abandonware. It's really interesting.
Well.
Yeah. And free. So
yeah. It's strange how we've sort of gone backwards. It's come out of the computer onto the table. And, because remember, like, what was it? The software that actually had the virtual patch bay with actual
Reason. Yeah, that's how I learned.
Reason and Rebirth. Mm-hmm.
With actual patch cables that like wiggled when you moved them and all that sort of stuff, And now we actually have that. And actual faders, pots with little drop shadow on them so that they looked 3D. Mm-hmm. And now, that's so weird. Beautiful weird.
Yes.
But,
it is interesting, the evolution, just to like see the whole history of where we're at right now. We love talking about it, as you can tell.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, it's really cool.
We've sort of gone backwards in order to go forwards in a good way, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Not to tell on myself too much, but that is something my therapist told me this week. That if I'm going to take a baby step forward, sometimes it feels like you're going back, but you're just getting momentum.
Yeah. I think that's if I had a therapist, and I know enough people have said I ought to.
Like, don't want to claim that quote from myself. That was from her, but I think that's really on my mind. And I like what you said about that. Like, in order to go forward, you do sometimes need, I think always, but go back and get what was going on, what's really needing to be advanced.
Yeah. I think it's better than just treading water, which is, and it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to live in this kind of permanent status of just sort of, endlessly recycling.
Oh my gosh, yes.
But a bit of regression, I think, can actually, move you forward.
I love it. Well, I'm going to thank you.
We've got deep, haven't we? God.
We really have. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Cosmic Tape Music Club podcast. We're so happy to have you with us here. Robin the Fog, can you tell us where people can find your music? And, if you have a website or where you want to point them, we're going to put that in the show notes.
Okay. Well, you can visit robinthefog.com, which is my kind of main website. If you go to the About page, there's a wonderful shot of me bending over a tape machine, looking both competent and sort of weirdly... I don't know. It's a black and white photo, which catches me in my best light. I look sort of weirdly mercurial and sort of, commanding, which is not a state I spend much time in. So robinthefog.com/about. Start there. Look at that simmering picture of me smouldering. And then you can listen to music as well. There's also howlround.co.uk, which is the sort of special site just for the Howlround project, although there is Howlround stuff on robinthefog.com as well. I'm on Twitter at robinthefog. I'm on Instagram at robinthefog. Or you can, if you find yourself in Penge in South London, you can pop round. The kettle's always on. I'll play you some weird noises and we'll have fun. And but you guys are totally welcome around anytime you like.
I was going to say, be careful now. We're gonna take you up on that. I'm British technically, so it's just a matter of coming home.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that.
Well, there is nothing I like more than having people around and mucking around with weird noises. So it's an open call. If any of you guys are in Penge, anyone knows where Penge is. But if you are, no, seriously, in London, nobody knows where Penge is.
I love the idea that someone who listens to the Cosmic Tape Music Club podcast is going to show up on your doorstep, ready to play with tape. I can't wait for that to be something that actually happens.
If they're up for a bit of experimentation and they can hold their tea, then let the games begin.